So in part 1, we discussed PONT TU GARD scheme, aqueduct in France built by the Romans. They had they tapped into a water source, a river in a mountain. They had a structure, and then transported water through a tunnel, and then went into the aqueduct and went to the cities. So this is the aqueduct. So I'm just going to briefly go through what we discussed in part 1. So the water comes to this aqueduct through a tunnel, and then it goes like here, it's broken, and it goes to the cities and to a bathing area here and to buildings, etc. So this is one of the tunnels that aqueduct used, and we discussed the knowledge required, building tunnels. So they have to know about the rocks, where the hard rocks are available. They have to know about the fractures, and the fractured zones has to be plastered, and they have to be able to deal with geological features like the sedimentation layers, rock joints. And remember, they didn't have type of bolts and anchors that we have today. So they work with amazingly strong plasters. They had that those bonds, and once it goes through the tunnel, it would go to this aqueduct here. This is the top of the aqueduct, and as you could see, the amazing craftsmanship here. The stones are binding each other, hugging each other, and you have this aqueduct, and they have to design for these windows. That's the most difficult part, and here it's very thick, so mostly the gravity of the weight of the structure holding it down, but still here it would try to fall, and they didn't have the base plates and anchor bolts we have today, so everything has to be held with plaster, and they have to maintain the surveying, the the elevations, the slope, and a lot of engineering went into this, and settlement properties of soil, because nothing going to be like that. They have to account for that. They have to account for some type of settlement in these soils. Now the settlement is not the same in everywhere. It depends on the type of soil. So they have to investigate what type of soil available. And if one starts settled, then your slope would go totally wrong. Let's say water is supposed to go this way, and if one of these settles, and this would be high, and then the water would stop here, because this has settled, comes here, and this hasn't settled. So they have to account for that. So a lot of engineering went into that. So we discussed all that in part 1, and now part 2 we are going to discuss the engineering required for the Elahera scheme. I did discuss a little bit, but we're going to go in a little detail here. So this is the Elahera scheme, and there's an acre, and in part 1 we discussed the water would go through this canal, and the canal has to cross natural streams, and then the water would come and has to go like that, and it easily could go like this along with the natural stream. Then you lose all that water. So you have to place your slopes in a certain way, and various structures were built to make sure that water would go the way you want it. So there's technology involved, and we discussed these anchors in the part 1. If you didn't listen to part 1, then I would recommend you to listen to part 1. And they had these little tunnel structures, and then the reservoirs. So now we look at the bund. The bund, this is the top is around 30 feet and the bottom is around 300 feet. A lot of work involved, and these bunds has to hold water, and if the bund is made of sand, and when the water is flowing, the soil is going to get eroded. So you need to use proper soil to so that it won't get eroded. So also you need to have the structural properties. You know, some soils won't compact properly. Some soils are just not strong enough to hold water. So they have to know what soil to be used and what soil not to be used. And they have to know the topography, actually, topography, not topology in the area. So, for an instance, let's say they have contours. They have contours like this. So this is the contour at 25 feet, this is 20 feet. Now the water is going to flow through the highest gradient. So over here, it drops 5 feet. Drop 5 feet in a smaller distance. So this is a high gradient here. The water would try to go from the high gradient. And the gradient changes here, so the water would try to go this way. So the water try to follow the most steepest gradient. So if that's the way you want to go, fine, but that's not what required. You have to go in a different direction. You have to go wherever you're going. So there is lot of topographical. Now, I don't know whether they build these contours, and they have to have some contour-like system to make sure that these canals will flow where they're supposed to flow. And some of these slopes are maintained at 1 in 10,000. And that's pretty amazing slopes to maintain with that. And the other thing is crossing these streams, existing streams. So the water comes along the canal, this is the canal, and you have an existing stream here, and the water is supposed to go through that. So they have to have pretty much good knowledge on hydrology. And the bunds, if you build the bunds with sand, only sand, the water is going to seep out, because sands are highly permeable material. So on the other hand, non-permeable material like silts and clays, they will not seep out water, but they are not strong enough to hold water. This pressure is going to break away. So, and they don't have the weight. So you need to have a mixture of sand, silts, and clays. And they have to have a good idea of these properties of these soils to build those bunds. Small reservoirs, not a problem, but the big ones, you need good knowledge of strength of soil and permeability, etc. And then this is the cascade system that they use. So the water would come to one reservoir and goes to another reservoir, and there are paddy fields in between. There are areas to purify water. Something like this, the water would come to a smaller reservoir, and then there's an area to purify water that they use certain plants, and then goes to the main reservoir and then to the paddy field. So each reservoir has this system. And so as you could see, technology involved is different in Sri Lankan system. There are no major structures like aqueducts, but you need to have good knowledge of hydrology, how the water is going to flow, open channel flow, and contours, topography, and properties of soil, and strength of soil, storage capacity, reservoirs. And these large reservoirs did not appear in any part of the world. Only in Sri Lanka you see these big reservoirs with 5,000 acres of surface area. And that is because it's not easy to hold water. If you have a water tank, even if you build with concrete, if you build a water tank with concrete, after a few years later, you're going to see some leaks. Water is relentless. You just keep trying to get out of it. And they didn't have concrete at that time. They had soils and rocks. And, it would try to go through these soils and rocks. And in most cases, it goes through. So it's not easy. And that's the reason why you don't see these large reservoirs in other countries. Otherwise, you would see them in China, and you would see them in India or in Japan. But somehow the technology was not available in those countries to build large reservoirs. And you have to control the pressure, you have to control the flow volume. So that type of technological knowledge is required. So we talked about the criteria. So first criteria is volume of water transported. So PONT to GARD, the aqueduct is roughly 7 feet by 6 feet, and the Elahera canal is 50 by 25 feet, so 20 times bigger volume. But it was this was a structure, so then this is a canal. And then the volume of water stored in the PONT to GARD scheme, they had underground caverns, and they hold around 1 million cubic meters of water. But the Minneri reservoir holds 100,000 acre feet, which is 1,300 million cubic meters. So thousands of times more. But it was a different system. Aqueducts are used for supplying water to cities, and the Elahera canal scheme was used to supply water for paddy fields. So it's a different purpose and different system. But if you're going to look at the volume of water stored, the Elahera scheme has thousands of times more water stored. And technology, another criteria. So to do a project like PONT to GARD, you need to be able to have good technology in tunneling, rock mechanics, structural strength of arches, high strength mortars, surveying, topography, contours, all that. And in Elahera scheme, knowledge of open channel flow, properties of soil and rocks, soil strength for the bunds and the spillways, weirs along the canals, topography, contours, and surveying. So different skill set here, different skill set there, technologically speaking. And then we go to the work involved in both schemes. A lot of work involved. You could see that to building those aqueducts is not easy. You need a lot of people. You have to build scaffolds. You have to build transportation of rocks. You have to cut the rocks, quality control, etc. And Elahera scheme, same thing. A lot of work involved with those bunds, compaction of soil, and the canals has to be excavated out with human labor. And the work involved is amazing. So millions of people have to get involved, and when you have so many people involved, you have management issues, scheduling issues, etc. Confirmation of antiquity, historical documents. Plenty of historical documents are available for PONT to GARD and for the Elahera scheme. There's plenty of material available, inscriptions, Mahavansa, etc. And same thing with the PONT to GARD scheme. The Roman writers, historians, written plenty of stuff. And they still exist. Most structures still exist in both cases. And the uniqueness in the world, the next criteria. Roman aqueducts are unique in the world. Only Romans built them. So they're all over the Europe. They're in France, England, all those European countries, but it was part of the Roman civilization. And about Elahera type schemes are not seen anywhere else outside Sri Lanka. You don't see these type of canals crossing rivers and then hitting these large reservoirs. In most countries, the schemes are limited to canals. So large reservoirs seems to be not seen in other countries. So that was, and when you put together the whole package, you don't see a scheme like Elahera scheme in other parts of the world, large schemes. So these are the criteria, and I mean each system has different function. Aqueduct system is to supply water to a city, which is done effectively, and the Elahera scheme is to supply water to paddy fields. With the scheme, they have the canals, they have the large reservoirs, cascading system, purification system. So both systems have it's not apples to apples. So but both schemes are technologically advanced schemes, and a lot of work involved, and they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Their function is achieved in both cases. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again.